The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, I'm Zoë Kessler and welcome to PsychCentral's Cultivate Empowering Beliefs, How to Create Personal Freedom and End Self-Sabotage webinar. We're going to learn this in an hour apparently. I'm really excited about tonight's webinar and I'm so glad that so many of you could attend. Thank you so much for signing up. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. So keep your questions in mind, make notes. You can use the question box to type in your question, or you could also use the chat. So I hope everyone is comfortable with that. We have a very special guest here. This is another one of PsychCentral's bloggers. Mike Bundrant has been blogging. His blog is called, let's see, Mike, you're there. I wrote it down. NLP. What is your blog called, Mike?
NLP Discoveries.
Thank you. NLP Discoveries. And for those of you who don't know or who haven't visited Mike's blog, NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And Mike, our presenter tonight, is a retired psychotherapist, a practicing life coach, and founder of the NLP Center. He's also an NLP master practitioner. He's a lot of things. He's also an author. He co-authored a book called Holistic NLP, and he hosts a popular mental health radio program called Mental Health Exposed on the Natural News Radio Network. And this network hosts 10 podcast programs and receives 1 million podcast downloads each month. Now, Mike has had the pleasure of interviewing some of the most celebrated leaders, experts, and authors in the field, and he's got a new program every Wednesday. You can find more information and a link to that program at his blog at PsychCentral.com. So do check out NLP Discoveries there and learn more about Mike, more about NLP. And of course, today our session is approximately 40 minutes. We'll have a presentation by Mike, and then, as mentioned, we'll switch to a question and answer. I'm Zoë Kessler, and I also blog for PsychCentral.com. My blog is called ADHD from A to Zoe. So thanks once again for joining us. It's 7:03, and from conducting webinars in the past, I do know that our hour goes very quickly. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over the reins to Mike for a presentation, and I'm looking forward to it. So here we go. Do try and remember your questions.
Okay, can you hear me? I hope you can. Thank you, Zoe, for that incredible introduction. I really appreciate it. And now I am going to show my screen and click to the start of the PowerPoint presentation. So I hope that that did the trick. Hopefully on my screen, what you see is a slide that says Cultivate Empowering Beliefs, How to Create Personal Freedom and End Self-Sabotage. And yes, we are going to cover the basics of this inside of an hour. I don't guarantee you'll be cured of self-sabotage inside of an hour, of course, but you'll have a foundation that perhaps you have never been exposed to before. This material is unique. You don't encounter it very often. Sometimes it's very challenging material, I'll warn you, but it's very empowering. So we're going to put together some ideas here about limiting beliefs and how to release our deep attachments to these limiting beliefs so that we can be free from self-sabotage and the negative emotions that inhibit our chances of success in life. So more specifically, the webinar topics we're going to cover are how beliefs relate to personal empowerment and self-sabotage, how deeper psychological attachments maintain cycles of self-sabotage, and how to end the attachment cycle for greater personal freedom, choice, and success. This whole process is what we call cultivating empowering beliefs. So what are beliefs? Let's tackle this idea. Beliefs are your individual interpretation of what you see, hear, and feel in the outside world. So the interesting thing about beliefs is that we often confuse beliefs with facts. Let's take a look. Here's a fact. Let's just say this is true. It's raining outside. That's a fact. It's a very plain statement to make about something that's happening in the world. We could interpret that fact in a certain way that we call more of a belief, that rain ruins all the fun. Now, you'll notice that there may be a million different ways to interpret that belief. You could also say, wow, it's raining. That makes it more fun. So the interpretation is subjective. Here's another fact. My father moved away when I was 7. That could be a verifiable fact. We could interpret that fact and say, I must not be lovable since my father moved away. And again, there's a million different ways to interpret that belief. We could say, my father had issues. My father was narcissistic. My father lacked commitment. My father was ill. It could be anything. However, most often we interpret these unfortunate events in a way, or commonly we interpret these unfortunate events in a way that is disempowering. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, you see at the bottom of the slide, we're born believing. A man bears beliefs like a tree bears apples. You can't not believe. So why is your interpretation of the world important? It's because it leads to behaviors. We act upon what we believe. Now, when you look at this slide, all things being equal, assuming that you have a choice as to which path to go down, why would anyone ever go through the storm to the left when the road to the right is available? And it's interesting to note that even though we often have a choice, sometimes we don't, sometimes there's no choice and unfortunate things just happen, we've got to go through the storm. But even when we do have a choice, so often we pick the road to the left. And we've set out to discover why. Why do we often choose negativity? Why do we cling to it when there are other options available to us? And that's what this is all about. So I'm going to tell you a couple of stories, give you a couple examples that are based on real interactions with people, but of course all the names are made up and the scenarios are composite scenarios of different people's stories. But let's take an example. This is Scott. And let's just say that Scott is the man whose father left him when he was a child. And Scott believes that his father left him because Scott is unlovable. Now, as an adult, Scott wants to get married and have a family of his own. But Scott doesn't think anyone could really love him because he believed his father didn't. And this is a real common belief, by the way. So Scott continues on with his life, not reaching out and trying to find a special someone. Or if he does find someone, he believes that she might abandon him just like his father did. So when he starts to get close to someone new, he gets a feeling of dread in the pit of his stomach. He breaks off the relationship. He rejects her before she has a chance to hurt him. Unconsciously, he believes that it's inevitable that he'll be abandoned because deep down he carries that old belief that he's unlovable. Who would want to be with me? Who would want to make a commitment to me? Now, I'm sure this idea is not new to many of you. You're familiar probably with how limiting beliefs can create conflicts and so on and so forth within us. But let's take a look. Here's what Scott wants. He wants consciously to fall in love, to start a family, and to be happy. Pretty straightforward. However, Scott has limiting beliefs. I'm unlovable. I will be left. I don't deserve to be happy. So these limiting beliefs determine Scott's perceived limitations. And you know what? The limiting beliefs so often win. And this combination of things right here, this conflict, is the making of self-sabotage. This is the term we love to hate. When we unconsciously work against the things that we consciously want. That's self-sabotage. I want something, I start to go after it, and then I get in my own way somehow. This could be any number of things. I start on a goal to get healthy, and it starts to go well, and then for some reason I abandon the goal, and I get lazy, or I blatantly do something to make myself unhappy, and I return to these old patterns again and again and again. So consciously I want one thing, unconsciously something else is going on. This is the setup for self-sabotage. Now, most therapies will attempt to deal with the self-sabotage, many times successfully, by changing the limiting belief. That makes perfect sense. We figure if we can get rid of the negative belief, that will only be left with positive beliefs, and there you go. The problem is solved. There's nothing getting in my way. And there are some common ways that therapies, often very successfully, deal with limiting beliefs. And I'm going to talk about 4 of them. The first is what we call inner work. Basically, the idea with doing very straightforward inner work is that we change our inner structure. We change, for example, our internal dialogue. We change our imagery, and we change our feelings. We try to modify our internal experience. So it's just a fancy way of saying change the way that you think. So instead of telling yourself negative things, you tell yourself positive things. Instead of saying, I hate exercising, you say, I love exercising. It makes me feel great. Now, this kind of change of your internal structure can be very effective. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It is a great thing to learn. I do it all the time with my clients. In fact, much of NLP or neuro-linguistic programming has to do with changing your internal structure and working directly with it. Now, one thing that I have found over the years, both as a client of many therapists and as a therapist and a coach, is that this kind of work, sometimes it just doesn't stick. In other words, we can start to tell ourselves positive things, but then before long we find ourselves in that old pattern, maybe criticizing ourselves. And we're going to talk about perhaps the reasons for this a little bit later in the presentation. But inner work is one of the ways that we attempt to address self-sabotage. Direct suggestion is another way. If you go to a therapist, a coach, or maybe a hypnotherapist, they'll often tell you things directly, whether through conversation or maybe even if you go to a hypnotherapist, you go into a trance and they'll give you the suggestion in the hopes that your unconscious mind will pick it up. And basically the idea here is that instead of telling yourself positive things, someone else will tell you positive things. And if you get that feedback from somebody else based on a good relationship, you can come to believe it and it can stick. And the limitation of this kind of work is that often it doesn't stick. It's not enough. There's something lurking in the background or beneath the surface that tends to reject these suggestions. And again, we'll talk about the reasons for that here in a little bit. There's another kind of work that I call immersion work. It's immersing yourself deeply into your childhood, attempting to unrepress yourself, emotions that are pent up and so forth. There's a lot of different therapies that are intended to immerse you into your feelings in your childhood and your past and so forth, on the hopes that you will uncover the limitation. And again, this type of work is typically very, very helpful to people who have a hard time expressing themselves, to people who are in denial that they have anything wrong with them at all, or that they've been hurt. Very effective to do this kind of work. A lot of emotionally unavailable men should do this kind of work, sort of diving into your pain. Now, this kind of work, in my experience, has a limitation too, in that there isn't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to change your paradigm. It doesn't necessarily mean that because you are aware of something that you're going to let go of it. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. There's lots of people who have done deep immersion work, and yet they hang on to the same limiting patterns in their life. So that's deep immersion work. We'll talk a little bit about why that, a little bit about why we have some limitations around that. And then the final common way of dealing with self-sabotage is straight behavioral work. In other words, if you have a behavioral pattern, the idea would be that you go against that behavioral pattern. Again, very, very useful thing to do. So for example, if I believe that I'm just kind of a lazy, no good, unproductive person, and I've got lots of evidence in my life that that's true, then I might be coached to, okay, let's get up and get moving. You're going to go out and you're going to be really productive, and you're going to prove to yourself that you're not a lazy person. And once you have that evidence, you'll be able to let go of the laziness and that belief that you're a lazy person. You're going to create a new history from this moment forward. Again, a very, very useful thing to do. And there's some limitations around this approach as well, as there are with all approaches. But the limitations are that you have to overcome the laziness in order to prove that you're not lazy in the first place. Sometimes the internal resources are not enough to go out and prove something different. So the weakness, if there is one, of all of these approaches is that often they only address the surface of the problem, the part that is accessible consciously. And you know, it's sort of like a weed in your garden. If you don't remove the root, but just the stem and the leaves, the weed will just grow right back. And so what we're wanting to get at is what is at the root of this. And here's some examples on this slide of maybe some of the limiting beliefs. They really are the stem and the leaves. What we're trying to get at is what holds these limiting beliefs in place. And that's what we're interested in, because if we can get at the root, if we can get at what's keeping me attached to these limiting beliefs, these limiting behaviors, to that voice in my head that tells me I'm no good, if we can get at what keeps us, what makes us cling to that, then we've really, really got something. And basically, what we call the root of the problem a psychological attachment. So this is the root. It's sort of the crux of the matter here. It's that we can be attached to negative experiences, the same as positive ones, just like a garden can grow weeds as well as flowers and fruits and vegetables. So how do we know? You could say, you know what, that's just silly. Why, you know, how would I know I'm attached to something negative? I don't want to be attached to anything negative. Well, here's how we know. It's that these negative experiences and patterns, they remain with us even though we don't like them. They remain with us even though we try to get rid of them, and even in therapy often. They remain with us because they have roots in our psyche. If there were no deeper attachment to these patterns, if there are no deeper attachment, then we could easily get rid of them. We could just dismiss them out of our mind. We could just dismiss that critical voice, or that laziness, or lack of discipline, or that feeling of helplessness. We could just dismiss it and make it go away if it didn't have a deeper root in our psyche. So this is what we call a psychological attachment. They're consistent. When we have an attachment, well, we come to identify ourselves this way through our childhood, and we expect it to happen. It's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. We sort of say, this is my lot in life. And in a strange way, we can even be attracted to them or find a sense of familiarity in that negative place. It's sort of like, this problem defines me, and I don't know what it's like to not be me, and so I'm going to stay right here. And even though I might not like it here, I prefer to be here, and I'll pass up other options along the way because this is who I am and this is what I know. When we think this way, or when we behave as if this were true, we have an attachment. That's what an attachment is. It's a long-standing pattern where we cling to something negative. So let's look at what these attachments are. We've categorized them into 3 categories. And just for simplicity's sake, there aren't real categories. We've just tried to categorize them in such a way that it makes sense. So the first attachment is the control attachment. This is different than you might think. The control attachment involves a tendency to feel controlled. Even though you resent it, you don't like it, but you often behave in a way that encourages others to correct or to monitor you, to take charge of you. The second attachment that we'll talk about is called the deprivation attachment. The deprivation attachment involves a tendency to feel unfulfilled or empty in life while attempting to fill that emotional void with things that can never fulfill it. A lot of addictive behaviors come from this. A lot of relationship issues come from this, being attracted to emotionally unavailable people or narcissistic people who can't and won't fill your needs. You do feel empty and lonely and deprived, and yet you're sticking with this person or these kinds of people in your life. It's a strange thing, these attachments. The last attachment that we'll talk about, I'm going to give examples of how each of these might play out. The last one is the rejection attachment. This involves a tendency to feel hurt or ostracized, criticized, often by our own inner voice. But we often do things that invite the criticism or rejection. So again, this is a little bit of a different spin on these. But let's take a look at each of these attachments, and we'll give a sort of a detailed scenario of how they can develop. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can develop an attachment to being controlled or to feeling controlled. This is just one example. But let's say that you grew up with very controlling parents or a very controlling authority figure in your life that you gave a lot of power to. You didn't have a choice but to do that as a child. The rules might have been very tight. The punishment for breaking the rules might have been very severe. And so you lived in fear of breaking the rules. And when you did break the rules, sorry about that. When you did break the rules, you were hurt physically or emotionally. And so from very early on in life, you learned to expect to be controlled. This is what you came to expect. It was the only reality that you knew. The reality that there are many, many options in life was not part of your experience as a child. And so as a result, you came to expect and maybe even depend on being controlled. You anticipated it, you made decisions or failed to make decisions knowing it would happen. And because of this, you would have developed what we call an attachment to being controlled. Now, this does not mean that you like being controlled. In fact, you probably don't like it at all. However, subconsciously, you actually expect and depend upon it to keep you in line. You've not lived to learn without somebody monitoring you. And of course, no child does who has parents of this kind. So as you leave childhood, you take your attachment to being controlled with you into the adult world. Again, you may hate and resent being controlled. You might even consider yourself a rebel or an anti-authoritarian kind of person. Nonetheless, you have a knack for attracting control, whether you like it or not. You may have developed a pattern in your relationships of being controlled, then rebelling against the control, only to be controlled again. This is how a lot of power struggles in relationships materialize. So let's take a look at a scenario of how this might play out in adult life. This picture probably tells the whole story. But here's a couple. We'll call them John and Mary. And John and Mary have plans to go out to dinner with friends. And so while Mary is getting ready, John sits on his laptop surfing the internet. He knows it's getting close to the time to go, but he keeps telling himself that he has plenty of time to get ready. And finally, when he hears his wife coming out of the room, he runs to his closet, throws on some wrinkled old casual clothes, slides into his flip-flops, and he says to himself, "I can dress however I want." Now, you can guess what Mary says when she sees him. She says, "Seriously? I mean, get upstairs and put on some decent clothes. Gosh, I wouldn't be caught dead with you looking like this. We're going to a nice restaurant, and now we're going to be late." So John resents his wife's controlling behavior, tells her to get off his case, but reluctantly he goes upstairs or wherever to change. He comes back down. He's upgraded his attire a bit, perhaps, but he's still wearing his junky old flip-flops. And again, he's met with more demands from Mary. At the restaurant, stressed for all the demands that he's been under and upset and angry, he drinks too much, which invites intervention from Mary. Of course, after all, he's supposed to be driving home and not acting like a lush in public. So there she goes again, more intervention, more trying to control my wife. This is trying to control my life. This is John's experience. Now, of course, he feels an even greater desire to rebel and drink. On and on, this cycle continues. This is a really good example and a common one of what the control attachment looks like. John, in this case, is encouraging others to intervene and make demands by virtue of his behavior. By acting like someone who does not know how to manage himself, from dressing inappropriately to drinking too much, John is inviting someone else to come in and take charge. All the time, he's unconscious of his attachment to feeling controlled. Consciously, he hates being controlled, and that's what he focuses on. He unwittingly invites more control, which is the very thing he hates, into his life by showing that he will not govern himself. Now, from the roots of this attachment, several limiting beliefs may develop. Women are controlling. Or it's no use trying to do what I want, or I'm trapped. People with control attachments are generally the people who feel the most controlled. Now, John may attempt to address his belief that women are controlling by trying to see women in a different light. They're not controlling. He might attempt to address his limiting belief that it's no use trying to do what I want by trying to change his perspective and become more insistent that he can do what he wants. However, if you're attempting to address these beliefs without addressing the underlying attachment to being controlled, then you're not dealing with the issue, in my view, at the root of the problem. And that's a scenario of what a control attachment looks like. I hope you have some questions about this and that you're writing them down. For now, we're going to go on to the deprivation attachment. The deprivation attachment, let's say that we have a child whose name is Debbie. And Debbie grew up in a household with both parents working. The father was gone 12 hours a day, off at his job. The mother was a nurse on call, and so she worked all kinds of odd hours. And so the kids were pretty much left on their own, not uncommon. Because of the lack of available parents, Debbie did not get a lot of her emotional needs met. Now, ultimately, Debbie was very saddened by her unfulfilled and empty family life, and over the years, she simply stopped hoping for fulfillment. She repressed her sadness and accepted inner emptiness or numbness as her way of being in the world. And as Debbie grew up, she went on to date boys and find a husband. She met a man named Carl. Carl was focused on his career and quite attentive to her in the beginning, so Debbie was hopeful that he was the one, and soon they were married, of course. And as time went by, though, Debbie began to notice the lack of attention she was receiving from Carl, and that his main focus was his job and being on his computer. Now, Debbie figured that that's just how it goes, and so she unwittingly settled and quietly suffered, again, much like in her childhood. Over the years, Debbie continued to not express her concerns or her need for attention and love and connection from her husband. Consequently, Carl did not see or fulfill her needs or change his course at all. And of course, this led to more disappointment on Debbie's part and eventual resentment. Debbie began to see Carl just like she saw her father, a hopelessly disinterested and emotionally unavailable man. Now, because of her unfulfilled needs, Debbie chose to fill her void with the habit of watching TV and overeating. By doing so, she unconsciously invites further emptiness and loneliness into her life by making herself less and less interesting and less attractive to Carl. Debbie goes through her life making decisions that cause her to be deprived. By choosing to be with a man she didn't know well or who was emotionally unavailable, by attempting to fill her void with food and TV, she remains chronically unfulfilled. By not expressing her needs or making any demands of her husband, she unwittingly chooses this cycle of deprivation in her life. Of course, she doesn't really realize what she's doing. She believes she's doing the best she can under the painful circumstances. Her friends, however, see the truth, and they don't understand why she doesn't take more proactive steps toward change and express her needs. Debbie's behaviors are actually inviting the thing that she hates the most, which is inner emptiness. Until she realizes and addresses her deeper attachment to feeling empty and unfulfilled, the cycle will never end. Now, from the roots of this kind of attachment, you might expect someone in Debbie's situation to have the following limiting beliefs. I can't expect others to satisfy my needs. This is actually a common one, but actually in life, we get a lot of our needs met in relation to other people. She could develop the belief, I don't matter, or that men are jerks. These are all beliefs that she might develop. People with a deprivation attachment, one of the main symptoms is that they generally fear expressing their needs or getting them met. So that's a little bit about the deprivation attachment. Again, these scenarios, they're just one scenario, one example. There can be many, many different kinds of examples of how attachments develop, how they manifest. Let's talk about the rejection attachment. Here's a common scenario for the rejection attachment. A boy, Timmy, grows up being bullied by his older brother, Frank. Everything Timmy does, Frank either makes fun of or he puts down. Frank tells Timmy he's stupid or is overly critical when he tries to accomplish something. It would seem like Timmy would just stay away from his older brother, but he actually looks up to him and wants Frank's approval. So Timmy just keeps trying. Now, Timmy gives Frank a lot of power, and for that, he gets beaten down time after time, year after year. As a result, even though Timmy hates criticism, he unconsciously has come to expect it. In fact, it's a requirement to endure criticism if he's going to relate with his older brother. So Timmy generalizes his tendencies to crave approval in spite of the criticism, and he soon enters many new social situations anxious and ready to fend off criticism and rejection. Now, in his romantic relationships, Timmy becomes needy for attention. The first couple of dates usually go well until he stops getting the amount of attention that he wants, and then he starts to get really serious too quickly, and he tries really, really hard to make girls like him. The moment he starts to feel that they're uninterested, he calls them, he buys them flowers, he dotes on them. Essentially, Timmy smothers them because he's desperate for their approval. He ends up pushing them away and feeling rejected, unwittingly getting exactly what he hates the most. He can't understand why these women wouldn't want to be with him because he's such a nice guy. Now, because of his rejection attachment, his self-confidence is low, and his limiting belief is that he's not good enough to deserve a nice woman. His want is to be approved of and loved. Unfortunately, because he's not aware of his attachment to rejection, he will keep trying too hard to please people who don't appreciate or value him, only to feel rejected and ostracized. Now, the kinds of limiting beliefs that might come from a rejection attachment: I'm unlovable, I'm not good enough, I will always be alone. Now, we can start to work on these limiting beliefs by going out and creating evidence that you're lovable, by changing your internal view of yourself and creating a more positive self-image and so forth. However, if we don't deal with the underlying attachment to rejection, it's very likely that the work we do on the beliefs won't stick. So people with a rejection attachment tend to do a lot for others who don't appreciate them or even end up hurting them. So now all of this is pretty obvious when we observe these behaviors from a distance. It's a lot easier to see these attachments in other people than it is to see in ourselves. For the control attachment, the advice we'd have to give is stop doing things that require you to be controlled. For the deprivation attachment, we would advise people, tell other people what your needs are so that they can meet them. For the rejection attachment, we'd say, listen, do things that encourage other people to respect you so that they'll accept you. But for the person who has the attachment, it's much harder. As we all know this, it's much harder because your attachment is your reality. It's what you know. It's what at a very deep level you've come to cling to. And it's not so easy to let it go, particularly when you're not even aware that it's going on. We have a mechanism within ourselves that hides these attachments from ourselves and where we don't really realize what we're doing. And that's the point of this kind of education. So let's look at the cycle. The attachment cycle, we've come up with 5 steps. It's not pretty, and it's quite painful. I know this in my own life as well. Deep negative attachments are formed in childhood. The attachments manifest in negative beliefs, feelings, and behaviors. We can't achieve what we consciously want because of self-sabotage. Again, I want something on the one hand. On the other hand, I seemed to be bent on going in the opposite direction. towards something negative. Again, it's that road to the left into the storm. I want to go down the road to the right, but something is just drawing me down the road to the left, sort of like an addiction. So nevertheless, we hide these attachments from ourselves. It's so hard to become aware of them. And so we try to change, and step number 4 here, we try to change without recognizing these deeper attachments. And it doesn't work. We remain in a cycle of hopeless self-sabotage. So what we've done at the INLPcenter.com, by the way, I co-developed this whole program with my wife, Hope. We really have dug through the history of modern psychology and psychoanalysis in order to find this thread of teachers and psychoanalysts, psychotherapists who are teaching this method and have been since the days of Freud. It's not mainstream, though, to say, look, you have an attachment to something negative, or you find a strange satisfaction in self-sabotage. There's something strangely familiar or even pleasurable about it. Not a lot of people are sort of open to that. And especially back in the 30s and 40s when some of this material was being formed. It's a tough one to get your mind around. But we've developed this process called the AHA process that is intended to stop the attachment cycle. None of us want to live in pain. None of us want to live with that old familiar feeling of angst in whatever context it is that it seems like we've had our whole life. That one issue that we just can't get rid of. It's very, very likely that it is the result of an attachment, that unconsciously, unwittingly, you're seeking it out. And expanding our awareness is the key, because we can't have a choice about things that we're not aware of. And that's the whole point of the AHA process. So I'll go through this. Now, I just will, I don't want to drone on about this, but I just want to say it takes willingness or even humility to be open to these ideas. And so, you know, these ideas require an unusual level of personal responsibility. They don't allow us to casually make other people or life or anything external to us responsible for what goes wrong. And that's really what this is all about. So the AHA process is the process that stops the attachment cycle. The first step in the AHA process is awareness. It's to notice the manifestation of your attachment, which can manifest in a negative behavior, a negative thought. When you become aware of your attachment or the thought process that indicates that you're in your attachment, you're really halfway there. It takes a bit of practice to see it. It takes really slowing down. But it's eye-opening when you do. Now, these attachments can be infinite in variety, but again, we've categorized them to give us some handholds. We're all susceptible to all 3 categories of attachments: the control, deprivation, and rejection. So now, becoming aware, it's not just the negative feelings or the negative beliefs that you're aware of, but the real kicker, the thing that really empowers the awareness is to become aware that you're attached to this experience, that you're at some level willing to recycle those negative things in your present life to maintain the attachment, sort of like unfinished business. And that awareness that you're attached is the awareness that begins the process of letting go. So just imagine that you have a control attachment for a moment, acknowledging that you have been unwittingly doing things day in and day out that send the message to others that you need monitoring. So, I mean, seriously, are you keeping your commitments? Are you doing your part around the house? Are you acting socially appropriate? Are you acting your age? Are you reliable? And so forth. Basically, are you self-regulating so that no one around you feels the need to regulate you? For someone with a control attachment, this kind of thing is a huge discovery to realize, you know, I hate being controlled, and so look at all the things that I'm doing every day that invites people around me to control me. I mean, what an amazing insight. That's the kind of awareness that we're going for, and it represents a profound shift. Now, once you have this awareness, and I often will tell my clients that when you wake up every morning, just take a moment and realize that at some level you're seeking to manifest your attachment. At some level you're seeking to experience your life through your attachment. Now, your job today is to catch yourself doing it. And when you catch yourself doing it, then you begin to have a choice. And that brings us to step 2, which is halt. Stop, step back, and consider your options. Now that you have a new awareness, you have a new choice. Always with additional awareness becomes additional choice. With limited awareness comes limited choice. And so if you're stuck in this rut, then you're going to be stuck in a rut. If you're stuck in a rut and you're aware of steps out of that rut on both sides, now you have a choice. And the important part is, don't let the autopilot rage on. Stop, step back, and go, here it is. I'm doing it. This is the very thing I'm doing right now that is going to encourage someone to control me. I'm at work. I'm turning in my report to my boss. I'm aware that there's a section of it missing. I'm turning it in anyways because, well, I'm making some excuse to do that. And I know that he's going to come back on me and be upset and order me around. Okay, now I've got to stop and consider my options. Do I really want to invite more of that control in my life? Okay. The next step is to act. Consciously choose an empowering option. When your consciousness is raised in this way, you do get that new perspective and new choices. When your behaviors are the result of unconscious attachments, you can't control them. You don't have the choice. When you make your unconscious conscious, then you empower yourself with conscious choice. So now we're to the part in the webinar where I'm going to show you a video of my wife, Hope. I'm going to click on this in a moment and really hope that the video works so that you can see. This is my wife, Hope, that she was sort of talking about an awareness that she had in our life that involves me, in which she became aware of one of her attachments and what she did about it. And this is going to play through my speakers on my computer, and hopefully the sound and the video will sync up. It's a couple-minute long video, so I'm just going to hope that it works. If not, bear with me and we'll move on. But here goes.
Hi, I'm Hope. I wanted to take a few minutes to tell you about how I've incorporated the AHA process into my life. I've always known about the idea of self-sabotage and therefore, like you probably have, on diffusing negative beliefs. But until Mike discussed with me the whole idea of the attachment theory, I didn't realize that I was self-sabotaging myself as much as I was. I kind of thought it stopped at the negative belief section. But apparently it goes a lot further, like you've seen today. So since learning about my deeper attachment and my numerous, actually, deeper attachments, I think we can have all three of them and they can go all over the place. But we'll focus on one that I dealt with last night. So let me tell you about what happened last night. Seriously, just last night. So, you know, Mike and I yesterday are working to get the whole webinar thing together for you guys yesterday. And I know I probably spent myself about 9 hours so far yesterday working on it. Additionally, I had homeschooled my younger son for a few hours. And I had just made dinner. I was making homemade pizza with special dough from Mike, his gluten-free dough, measuring it all out right and everything like that. So now, after all of that, you know, it's 7 o'clock at night or whatever, and I'm standing there washing the dishes, and he's across from me eating his nice little pizza and working on his computer. And I'm thinking, I I don't feel like washing the dishes. My back hurts, all of this. I've been busy all day. I started thinking about how it's totally unfair that he should be able to just sit there and enjoy his pizza since I ate my pizza while I was making his pizza. So I'm just thinking these negative thoughts, and pretty soon they start, going on and on and on, snowballing into this thing of me not getting my needs met. I'm thinking how he should have realized, hey, I'm washing dishes, you should be helping too. It didn't even occur to him that he should be helping. And so I'm getting all upset about that, and I'm totally in my deprivation attachment at that moment. Well, then all of a sudden, which I should be, I've been working on this webinar all day, I realized that what I was doing, and I realized my train of thought and how I got there. So I'm at the first A, awareness. And I go, oh my gosh, I see what I'm doing. I see this whole train of thought. And so I got to then go on to the H, which is stop. And I go, okay, I'm noticing it. I step out of it, because when we step out, we can actually see it a little bit more clearly. And I start realizing what I was doing. I was going from, how I was feeling inside about what I was having to do and putting it on him, and start thinking that he's not going to meet my needs, that I can't even ask him because he should technically know what I need, which is not really fair of anybody. And so I went into this whole thing of how I wasn't going to get my needs met. And so I went ahead, I looked at it, I saw it for what it was. I traced my train of thought, and I was allowed to really stop thinking that, think of my choices. And so in my head, I thought, what should I do at this moment? And, it requires being so consciously aware of what we're thinking. And so I thought, well, I could just say it. I could just say, hey, can you help me with the dishes because I'm really tired? I could say, hey, my back hurts. Can you give me a massage later? Anything like that. And it wouldn't even take whining or complaining. It's really just saying, hey, can I get some help? No problem. And so in my head, he answered, and he said, of course, I'll help you, no problem. Which is generally always what he does anyways. But, I should be able to just say what my need is instead of starting to feel all negative about him in it and start thinking of myself as a victim as well, which is what we're kind of doing, right? So once I decided what I wanted to do, I was able to do the last A in AHA, which is act. So I said it, and I told him, hey, I need your help. Do you mind helping? I've done a lot today, and I just really could use the help. I really don't want to be washing dishes. Do you mind? And he's like, no problem. And I said, my back really hurts. Would you mind rubbing it later? No problem. And so it was really great, and I took responsibility for what I needed, and it avoided any more negative thoughts about him. He became a great guy because he met my need, and it kept us from having a really bad night. So I was really proud of myself, and I just wanted to share with you how the AHA, the AHA process can work. So that's it. Now a lot of those ends up changing that whole behavior. So that's it.
Okay, so that is my beautiful wife, Hope, talking about her deprivation attachment, and the way that she describes that is exactly how you begin to work your way out of it. Once you see it, and once new choices occur to you, you act on those new choices. So simple, but it's the kind of awareness that, this is the kind of awareness that leads to change. So this is, I'm not sure at all, Zoe, how far we are into
Mike, I'm sorry to say we've only got 6 minutes left until 8 o'clock.
6 minutes left
and,
until 8 o'clock. Okay.
And I would like to say that I thoroughly enjoyed that video we just saw. It was a wonderful example, and I know we have some questions coming in, and I also I have questions as well. So I'm wondering if this is a good point for us to start into some questions, or?
Yes, absolutely. Let's go for it.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right. Okay, I'll go to the questions that are being sent in rather than hogging the time myself. I have a question from one of our attendees, and I'll just read it to you. Is there research supporting a neurocognitive basis or network for recognizing environment signals that activate the different types of attachment?
A neurocognitive, I don't think there's going to be research that supports this. If you really want to dig into the research, the foundations of this were developed by Dr. Edmund Bergler. He was a colleague of Sigmund Freud's. He wrote 300 scientific papers that were published in scientific journals about his studies on this, and he wrote 25 books. Most of them are out of print and quite difficult to come by. But there's been a significant amount of research. You sort of have to dig into the name Edmund Bergler.
How do you spell that last name?
B-E-R-G-L-E-R.
Okay, great. And pardon me, I had a question based on, I guess it's a general question, partly based on the last video that we saw with Hope. I'm wondering if I've got this right when I say that the AHA method being different than self-talk, is that because we're naming the root, as you would call it, that is the attachment? So, for example, that entire sequence, I know that I personally have found myself doing that kind of sequence without being remotely aware of your wonderful, AHA solution. But is that the difference between my doing a self-talk thing and really going deep and realizing it's one of these 3 attachments involved?
I would say that yes. In other words, when you realize that what I'm doing or failing to do right now, by sort of going on in my mind and complaining about what somebody is not doing for me, and by avoiding the opportunity to express my needs, I'm remaining in my attachment. The awareness that I'm creating this, I'm sustaining this attachment, once you realize that that's what you're doing, then you have a different choice. As opposed to just focusing on what I'm saying in my mind. So I could focus on what I'm saying in my mind and try to stop saying it, try to modify saying it. But the realization here is the very act of going on in this way in my mind is keeping me in my attachment. That's the realization that makes the difference.
Okay. And is it also true to say that realizing that this is a pattern that you've set up for yourself in a really ongoing way, year after year after year, to me that would be a little bit of a difference as well, as opposed to recognizing that you're causing this yourself and being able to respond in a different way because you've identified that it's the loop you're getting yourself in, seeing that as a longer term sort of problem or attachment. That would be the other difference, eh?
Absolutely, the fact that you're sort of sustaining this long-term pattern. And we start to raise the question, at what point am I going to stop this? At what point do I get to be done with this and let it go? And it's not until we realize that we've been holding on to it for so long that we can start to loosen our grip.
Exactly. That's what's so exciting to me about what you've presented tonight, because I've been able to do that self-talk stuff, but still the pattern goes on. So thank you. I have another question for you. And I don't have other questions, so I'd like to invite again people who are attending the webinar tonight. Feel free to type your question in the question box or in the chat, and we'll pass them along. I have another question, Mike, if you don't mind. You mentioned off the top that you've been a client of many therapists, and what I'm very curious about, I guess, sort of the range. I mean, I have too, and I'm curious about the range of therapies that, I guess it's not relevant, but is it fair to say that these different modalities have informed your preference for the NLP work because you have tried so many different ones? I mean,
yeah, I wouldn't say that. NLP is what I started with right out of college, and and so that's something that I was drawn to. But over the years of going to different therapists, and I've been to a lot of different kinds of therapists, I've done all the different work in those categories that I mentioned, I realized that but going back to NLP, I realized that it has its limitations. There's lots of times when these great interventions fail, and I started to ask why. I mean, a lot of people promote NLP as magic. Oh, and there's a lot of, no, that's not true. Mm-hmm. I used to look for magic bullets and these interventions that would, save me from myself. And what I noticed that what I've noticed, and this is the way that we teach NLP at the INLP Center now, which is when a strategic intervention, when a direct intervention doesn't work, there's usually something deeper going on, and that's how we got into these attachments. It seems to be this pure awareness that loosens the attachment, and it's not necessarily a strategic intervention. So it's the limitations of all the strategic interventions that got me interested in the deeper stuff.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. We do have another question here. Okay, I'll just read it. Someone is asking, once the individual becomes aware and knows they have an option to choose a healthier response, but just can't seem to choose the healthier option, what would be helpful as the next step? For example, a person overeats. She goes on a little bit. A person overeats when they're stressed and becomes aware of it and knows they can make a healthier choice but just doesn't want to. Is there something that can be done to motivate them to choose the healthier choice?
Yeah, I would say that overeating because of stress is not a deep enough awareness. In other words, we've got to figure out what the underlying attachment is. Is it an attachment to rejection or being perceived in a negative light by other people because you're overweight? Is it an attachment to deprivation and feeling alone and empty? Is it an attachment to some sort of helplessness? Really nailing down what the attachment is brings an aha experience. It's like, oh my gosh, you just told me the story of my life. And when you get that kind of aha, then the awareness becomes empowering. Now, often it requires being aware of it over a period of time. It doesn't necessarily mean we magically transform. Sometimes I have to say, okay, this is it. This is my attachment, and I'm staying attached to this, and I don't have the power right now to choose something else, but I'm still going to call it what it is. Now, I have found that over a period of months, very few people can maintain that level of deep insight and not gain a lot more choice. But you have to stick with it.
Beautiful. Okay, thanks. We do have a couple other questions, and I will just say that I'm aware that it's past 8 o'clock, so I'd like to agree that we'll go on a little bit further because we have some questions and try and wrap it up, say, around 8:10. For those who are still here, I would love to get to your questions. So we'll move on to the next one. Mike, all right. The next one that we received, I love this. Coming from ADHD world, I love this. Not saying the writer is ADHD, but I sure am, and my peeps are. Awareness seems like a challenge at times. Recommendations for how to pay attention and become more aware.
Yeah, that's a good question. It is a challenge. Basically, if you can't become aware of it on your own, you've got to talk to someone who can help you become aware of it. It is so helpful to talk to someone who has an objective perspective on you. If you just got to talk to somebody who can help you discover the attachment, then there's lots of helpful tools you can do. I ask my clients, I have them write down a mantra or get up every day and write down what your unconscious goal today is. And often the unconscious goal is to go through the day feeling deprived or resentful. A lot of times that goal is not pretty, but shining the light of our awareness on it is what makes the difference. And so if you can't get to that deep insight yourself, you've got to get someone who can help you get to that insight. And then just using a paper and pen or an alarm on your smartphone or something like that to raise your awareness throughout the day of what you're doing. Anytime you feel bad, anytime you have an interaction that you're not good about, that you don't feel good about, take a step back and focus on how your specific attachment played into that.
Perfect, perfect. And I find that amazing. Get up and realize that your goal is to fulfill this attachment. Wow, that's mind blowing. I have to listen to that again. That's
It is mind blowing.
That
it is mind blowing. But when you look at it, you go. I say to people, what if unconsciously, unwittingly, you had a goal to, X, to feel helpless or to. And all of a sudden, people go, wow, that sure makes sense out of things, because if I did have that goal, I'm really succeeding at it.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, another question. Thank you. This is great. Oh, I just feel like we need another half hour. Okay, this one ties into another question that I had as well, so I'll just read it. No, I would like to give a little background really quickly. Mike, you were talking about the deprivation attachment, and you referenced perhaps a family where there were unmet needs because the parents weren't available full-time. Both of them were away at work or what have you. And my question was going to be something along the lines of, back in the 50s, we almost always had at least one parent present, but still there may have been many unmet needs vis-a-vis a dysfunctional family. There are other ways to have needs unmet. So I think this question might speak to that as well. The questioner asks, I come from an emotionally and mentally abusive family. I'm always projecting that negative behavior still in my life, and now on to my husband of 3 years. I know I need to stop it because he'll end up leaving. It's so hard even though I know the steps and I'm seeking therapy. What would be your advice for me to first recognize my behavior when I start yelling at him when we're simply trying to communicate together?
Yeah, it would be to look at where your behavior is headed. It would be looking at where your behavior is headed. Is it headed toward rejection? By doing what you're doing, where is this going, first of all? And chances are it's going to some place that has something to do with your attachment. Is it an attachment to being rejected, feeling abandoned? And so you're sort of bent on behaving in such a way that encourages people to reject you. And if we say, okay, well, that's it, then, of course, then you've got to take ownership of the fact that you have an attachment to rejection. And, there's so many different ways that are available to come to terms with it. In our AHA Solution program, we talk about 12, there's these 3 attachment categories, and in each category there's 4 attachment types. So there are 12 attachment types, and you learn about each one, and there's a worksheet that goes along with each one that helps you track this. But the bottom line is you have to engage all of your awareness that you can muster into coming to terms with this unconscious goal to be rejected, and then a lot of times people have to deal with the unfinished business around that. In other words, it could be a sense of betrayal that you haven't squared yourself with your parents. There could be a lot of different things going on, but there's a reason why you're hanging on to it, and you've got to discover that reason. Sometimes it's just an unanswered question. I had a client who, as an adult, every time she would go home to her parents for just to visit or family get together, what have you, she'd end up being rejected by her father. And I said to her, do you know exactly what to say and do to get your father to reject you? She says, yeah, I know exactly what to do, and I end up doing it every single time, which is I challenge him, I come to my mother's protection, I get involved in things that aren't my business, and so forth. And I said, so if I say, I want you to go home to your dad and get rejected, you know what to do? She says, yeah, I know exactly what to do, because that is what I do. And it turned out that she had some real questions for her father that involved hurt feelings on her part, but she couldn't figure out why he was a celebrated member of the community, and just everyone thought highly of him in his work life, but at home he was a real jerk, and she hadn't really come to terms with that and said, how can this, she resented the fact that this guy could be so well thought of and act like such a tyrant or a jerk in the home, and she just hadn't come to terms with that, and so she kept attacking him. And there's the dynamic that had to unravel. She actually ended up going to have a conversation with her dad and said, I can't figure this out, and was able to ultimately let it go and stop doing that behavior. So there could be all kinds of different unfinished business that is holding that attachment in place, and you've got to learn what it is, and you've got to deal with it.
Wow, that duplicitous person. Haven't we all met someone like that? Or at least
Yeah.
I certainly have. Oh my goodness, speaking of unfinished business, this is so fantastic, Mike, really. Okay, besides listen to the replay, and I'll let folks know that we will have a video available of this entire session. It'll be uploaded. Mike, I guess we can put a link on your blog, yes?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so if you go to NLP Discoveries over at PsychCentral.com, give me a couple of days and we'll be uploading the video for review. But also, Mike, in terms of following up and following through on this kind of approach or therapy, I'm personally very interested, I'm sure others will be too. Two questions. First of all, what kind of a practitioner would we seek out? You mentioned, what was it, 13 different attachment types or 12 different attachment types. So what kind of practitioner would we look for to work with, number one? Number two, is this the kind of thing that we do need a professional to work with, or can we do it ourselves? Is there a book? Is there a workbook? Is there something we can do, for example, if we can't afford a therapist or we want to pursue this approach?
Yeah. There's different options. Now, unfortunately, this particular approach is brand new, and therapists typically are not trained in this. So you're not going to find a therapist who knows about these kinds of psychological attachments. Unfortunately, that's the case. So I wouldn't know. I couldn't tell you, do a search in and find your local therapist who practices, because this information has not been widely taught, and that's unfortunate, but that's the case. So I have my hands a little bit tied there.
Okay, what about the book that you wrote? Is there a book?
The program around this is called the AHA Solution. That is available at the inlpcenter.com. It's this program, and there are 5 other personal growth programs that go along with it. But the AHA Solution has a 20-minute introductory video, which is very similar to the webinar tonight, and then it has 13 other videos that explain the 12 attachment types and then how to use the program. Basically, you identify your attachment type, and then we have worksheets that help you work with that attachment type. This is a 100% online program.
Wow.
And people are having amazing success with it. You have to put in a little study. It's a little bit of a re-education, because it's a very different paradigm. But people are having, the end solution is very simple, and that's why people were able to succeed with it, which is identify your attachment type and raise your awareness around it. So we've created this program as our way of starting to get the word out about it. Then, of course, many of my coaching clients, I do coaching with people from around the world. It's over the phone or Skype. This is what I coach them about. I'm not doing a lot of NLP techniques with people these days. I'm trying to work as much as possible at this level and help people identify their attachments so they can begin to let them go.
Fabulous. Mike, I think we should probably wrap up now, but I just want to thank you so much on behalf of everyone. We've got some really positive thank yous and comments coming in, and I personally would like to thank you. I was so looking forward to this. I think we'll have to have a follow-up, really.
I'd love to. I'd absolutely
Terrific.
love to do a follow-up with it. Thanks so much.
All right, and in the meantime, we go to inlpcenter.com, yes, for the program?
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
There's a free video there that serves as an introduction. You put your email address in and into the form on the sidebar. It will take you to a free introductory video, and then from there you can buy the program if you want to.
Great. And once again, for everybody, give me 24 48, 72 hours, and we will have the replay up at NLP Discoveries, Mike's blog at PsychCentral.com. And Mike, I'll ask you to change the presenter back to me so we can wrap it up. And thank you so much to all the attendees. On behalf of Psych Central, I'm Zoë Kessler, another blogger, ADHD from A to Zoë, and please do come back for our follow-up and all the other wonderful webinars that we're planning for you through Psych Central. Mike, thanks again so much. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Zoe. Exhausted.
So your mic is still on there, Mike.
Did you hear me say I'm exhausted?
Yeah, I did. I'm going to end the webinar now. Good night.
Good night.